Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Private Hire Mike, and in this video we are going to be looking at is Uber worth it in 2024. So introduction, first things first, we are going to be assessing the financial viability of Uber driving in London in 2024, the impact of Uber on traditional taxi services in the transportation sector, and gig economy growth in general. So at the moment, Uber pretty much dominates the market when it comes to taxis, especially in London. If you ask anybody, your nan, your grandmother, your sister, your uncle, your auntie, your friends, whoever, they're all going to say, I think I'll book an Uber. So Uber definitely has that popularity, and it's impacted the taxi trade tremendously over the last 5 to 10 years, whereby a lot of the minicab offices now that you once used have shut down, or perhaps they operate online only. So pretty much Uber dominates the market, and we have seen a huge growth in the gig economy in London and in the UK in general. More and more people now are driving for these services driving for these services or using these services. So we're going to explore Uber's business model in London. So Uber essentially operate now as a service-based business. So they actually contract directly with the customer, charging VAT, which is then given to the government. So Uber now is a transportation business in London, and essentially their business model is that you go onto their app and they provide you with a list of options in terms of what you can book. Anything from an Uber X, which is generally a Prius, up to a Uber Lux, which could be an S-Class. And essentially their prices change. So at the moment, I believe they have peak prices and off-peak. And generally the peak pricing is going to be rush hour times and weekends and holidays. And essentially at these times, the price will go up. So now drivers are essentially classed as workers. So that means that drivers now have more rights in the eyes of the law. And Uber have introduced as well fixed fares. And what this means is that when you work for Uber now, they essentially give you a price on your screen, on your offer card, and it's a take it or leave it type of attitude. So, for example, you might have a job from London King's Cross to Birmingham, and they might offer it to you for £120. That's a fixed price, and that's up to you whether or not you take it. If you do decide to take it, you complete the journey, they will give you the £120. In terms of drivers now being classed as workers, that gives you workers' rights. So you get pension, and you get holiday pay, and a few more other rights, which I'll cover in another video. But essentially, this is the business model, and it's somewhat similar to the old model where you would just log onto the app and be available for work. But now as well, they have to guarantee you the minimum wage requirement. Again, I will cover this in another video. So, key statistics, number of active Uber drivers and users in London as of 2024. So I got this source from the Standard, and this was after sort of lockdown, and Uber were on a huge recruitment drive. And back in the year of 2022, Uber had about 45,000 drivers in London. And I believe it's a lot more now, bearing in mind there are about over 100,000 private hire drivers. Now, not all of these drivers work for Uber, but a good majority of them do. Even if they don't work for Uber full-time, they're likely working for Uber part-time to fill in the gaps. So, first thing to bear in mind is there is a lot of drivers out there all competing or all after the same pie. So, a brief reference to the regulatory impact on Uber in London. Again, Uber had to change its business model when it got taken to court. It is now classed as a service-based business. So when a customer books a ride, they are also paying VAT. And a lot of drivers are like, oh, Uber are charging a lot more money and they're only giving me 40% of the fare. Yes, their fares do vary. Now, again, I will cover this in another video, but we have to remember that now Uber are operating as a service-based business in London. So therefore, there is the price that the customer gets charged plus the VAT, and then Uber then have to put that on. You as a driver rather do not get the VAT, nor does Uber. So Uber then have to take a profit out of that. So again, prices will vary on jobs to jobs. So we're going to do a bit of an income analysis now. We're going to look at the average hourly earnings for Uber drivers in London and the variability based on like location and time. So in this job, where you live has an impact on your earnings. The time of day that you work has an impact on your earnings. So if you're working at times where it's not busy after rush hour or before, and you're in areas where there's a low demand, perhaps you're in a suburb, your money isn't going to be the same as somebody who perhaps lives in a busy city or rather next to a busy train station and works at these peak times. Earnings can again significantly increase during these peak times and also special events. So part of how much you can earn also depends on when you work, where you work, and seasonal things that can happen like events and other bits and pieces. So how much does an Uber driver make in the United Kingdom? So I've got this from uktalent.com. So it's a great website for learning about how much you can make. And here it says 36,500 annually. This is based on 34 salaries. Low tier, 29,000. High tier, 69,000 and a bit. The average Uber driver salary is 36,500 or around £18.72 an hour. So as you can see here, the money that you can make with Uber is pretty decent, considering that most people could do this job, providing that they fall into the right requirements set out by TfL, which is generally be over the age of 21, have a driving license with no more than 6 points for 3 years. Generally, I think that's the entry level point. Obviously, you have to do a medical check and a criminal background. But generally speaking, it's not a bad bit of money that you can earn with Uber. Obviously, we'll go into a little bit more about that in the next few slides. And again, this is what I got from another source, Autocar. And this is what a typical earnings could look like for a PCO driver. So as you can see, full-time, 45 hours a week, clearing about £922 per week. If you're a superstar driving, you're doing the 60 hours, then you could clear, 1,228 per week. And these figures, as you can see, were taken from the 6th of April, 2022 to 2023. And these averages, so Autocar, I don't know if you know Autocar, but they are a vehicle leasing service in London, and they deal with a lot of drivers, so they know what the figures are, because a lot of times I think they do their market research, or rather drivers would say, how much they're earning. And I'm sure that this stuff could probably be accredited as well, perhaps by HMRC with, tax returns and such. But as a Uber driver myself, I would definitely say that this is a good ballpark figure. Like I say, if you do full time, you are clearing about 900, maybe between 900 to 100 to £1,000 per week. So it's not too bad, and obviously you can do it as a side hustle as well, as you can see. So how the money roller coaster of dynamic pricing, I think surge pricing at peak hours impacts your piggy bank. So again, Uber driving, it always depends on your location of where you're working, the time of day, and also how hard you work. People know Uber charging surge. Now, Uber still does have surge pricing, but it doesn't work like it used to work. And I'll explain quickly. So again, what I wanted to say about this whole dynamic pricing is that it has changed now. So the inclusion of VAT at 20% in the UK means that Uber's cost to operate increased, as they are now responsible for remitting this tax to the government. This change has had an impacting on the pricing structure, including surge. Surge pricing would increase fares during high demand and short adjustments in the price. And Uber would essentially, before this, take a cut from the driver. So it was more in Uber's interest to charge more per ride to the customer, as they were taking a flat rate commission of 25%. Whereas now they sort of fix a price and then the VAT gets added on. So the surge is actually more now controlled by Uber themselves, whereas before it was done through supply and demand. So, for example, let's say there was 50 customers outside of Wembley Arena all booking a ride and there was only 10 drivers, then there was quite a big difference in terms of the ratio, and that would trigger a surge. And again, it was in Uber's interest to surge the price because they were taking a commission out of it. So the dynamic pricing now, and sorry, this has taken me a little while to explain this, it's more determined by historical data, I believe personally. So Uber will have set peak times. So again, it's important for you to know those times. And they actually do show it to you on the app now. You can see what are the busy times. And this will increase your money. So if you work during busy times like Fridays and Saturdays or early mornings, rush hours, you will make more money. And again, now I'm going to go on to this slide, comparing the national minimum wage with average earnings in Uber driving. So right here we have on the left, the current rates for the national minimum wage in the UK. And as we can see here, right, I'm just going to show you here, we have quite a decent amount of money, or rather, I'm just trying to see if I can move this around a little bit because I can't really see. I've kind of messed this up a little bit on my video, guys. But essentially, let me just see if I can move my face. Nice, can't seem to move it. I believe this figure here is £11.24. So that's £11.24 an hour is the national minimum wage. And if we look to the right, this was taken from Splend, again, average weekly earnings. We're actually going to calculate this in a few other slides. But as you can see, if you're making £925 per week with Uber doing 50 hours, then that works out about £18.50 an hour. And I'm going to go onto my slide here and show you, okay, full-time £925, 50 hours is about £18.50 minus 20% for expenses. This is what we generally do. Yours might be a little bit more, a little bit less. This is a ballpark figure. That brings us to £14.80 an hour. Take away 10% for your taxes, £1.48, leaves you with about £13.32 an hour. And if we compare this back to the national minimum wage, Uber have surpassed this. So if you are doing these type of hours, minusing, expenses and tax, you are going past the national minimum wage. Now, going on to expenses. So we're going to be talking about things such as vehicle maintenance, fuel costs, insurance premiums, and not so much Uber's commission. Like I say, they don't really have that anymore, but we're just generally going to be talking about monthly costs. And again, it can all be variable. I don't want you to take this as the gospel truth, guys, because it will vary from driver to driver. So let's quickly look at this. So common expenses for Uber drivers include vehicle maintenance. So if you own your vehicle, you'll have to maintain it. And generally speaking, you want to put about 5p to 10p for every mile driven. Then you have fuel. Fuel is one of your biggest expenses along with your car. Either you rent a car or you bought a car. Your fuel is going to be a heavy expense. If I'm doing a full week, I'm probably spending about 120, 130 pounds on diesel. Insurance, again, that will vary. But if you're new into this job, you could be paying £3,000 a year. And Uber's commission rates, obviously Uber, they take a service fee on each trip. So you need to work out these costs. I will be doing a separate video for this. And you also need to consider the type of vehicle that you have, if it's an electric or gasoline. The prices will vary, but this will be a huge key to this business for you to work out, is Uber driver worth it? Because you need to calculate how much money are you going to be spending on your vehicle rental? Are you going to buy the car? What kind of fuel are you going to use? Is it going to be diesel? Is it going to be petrol? Is it going to be electric? These things are to take into consideration. But as a ballpark figure, I'll give you a quick one. Let's say you rent a car, £150 a week, £50 a week insurance, £100 for fuel. Already that's £300. It's £300 before you've even broken even. That is something that you need to consider before starting a job like Uber. Real earnings, best case, worst case scenario. I'm going to go back to this slide here. As you can see, this is from Splend. I spelt it wrong. I do apologize. But this is, to be honest with you, a good figure. Like, I can account to this and say, if I'm, for example, working a full-time week, I'll probably clear about 900 to £1,000. And obviously you have to minus your expenses. As a ballpark figure, 20%, always, I'd say. More or less, but it could be more or less for you depending on if you own your car, if you've got cheap insurance, etc., etc. So yeah, here we go. £13.32 is what you're usually left with after a full-time week with your expenses. And, if you're doing 50 hours a week, you're making about £666 per week after tax. And I'm just going to show you this clip that I've got here. This is something I found online. You can see cost of living in London isn't cheap. Feel free to pause this and see for yourself. So you need to sort of decide, is the money that you're earning from Uber going to be enough to accommodate your lifestyle? And it's always going to be variable, but you really need to do the numbers. You need to look at things such as, how much rent do you have? Do you live at home? Or do you live out? Do you rent a car? Have you got children? You really need to work out based on your own expenditure. So I've just included this thing here. And again, this is just a idea of how much it costs to live in London. As you probably all know, London is not the cheapest place to live. Flexibility versus stability. This is a very key question to ask yourself when doing this job. This job is just brilliant for flexibility. The fact that you can choose when you work is great. You can do other things, you can study, you can go on holiday when you want. However, the flip side to that is stability. In this job, in this industry, earnings will change through time. Sometimes you'll make more, sometimes you make less. So that's something to take into consideration. Unpredictable earnings and, the lack of traditional employment benefits such as health insurance, paid leave. I mean, generally speaking, Uber don't really give you money. It's not like a job where if you're sick, you get paid. I think they do offer some type of sick pay, but the last time I checked it, it wasn't the most amount of money. So you need to trade off between job flexibility and financial stability. And I'm going to say, I've done this job for 5 years. When you're self-employed, there's going to be a huge account of financial instability. So at the end of the day, markets change. We saw this with COVID. During COVID, drivers were pretty much earning zero. Maybe if you're lucky, £40 to £100 a day working for Uber, picking up the nurses and doctors. So this is something that you need to consider before you start this job. Do you want something stable? Uber can be stable, but again, it can change. Market demand and competition. So as I said to you in another slide, Uber pretty much run the market. So there's no fear in the sense of not enough work. There pretty much is loads of work on the Uber platform. If I put my app on now, it will start ringing off. Competition wise, there are other apps as well. So there's Bolt, it's free now. You've got black taxis. But I would definitely say that Uber pretty much run, this game in London, and therefore I would say for the time being, there is the work out there. So now, pros and cons. We are going to be talking quickly about the flexibility, potential for earnings, etc., etc. So what I'm going to say here, guys, is look at what I've said, what I've told you, and sit down, if you have to get a pen and paper out and a calculator, write down the expenses first of how much it's going to cost you. For example, do you need to buy a car? Are you going to rent one? I've given you a rough idea of how much you'll be spending on fuel. Look at insurance quotes and go on some of the Facebook groups and see what drivers earn. You know, as I say, the ones that I've showed you are pretty good ballpark figures. You know, if you're doing like 50 hours a week, yeah, you can make about 900 to £1,000 per week. But again, you've got to put in the hours, and you've also got to be prepared to work at times that may not be the best for you. Because people say, well, this job is so flexible, you can work when you want. That is true. But at the same time, you need to work at effective hours. There's no point working at like 12 o'clock at night on a Monday because it's not going to be busy. Whereas if you're strategic and you look at the trends, you can work at times where it's busy. You can really work efficiently and utilize that. So bear that in mind as well. Do the numbers, and then I would always say work it out. You know, maybe try it out and see if it works for you. In this job and in any job, it's always relative. You know, £1,000 a week for one man could be a huge amount of money, whereas for another man it might not be because he has debts or perhaps a big family or a lot of overheads. See for yourself, and conclusions and recommendations whether Uber can be financially viable. I'm going to say try it out for yourself. I am going to be talking in future videos about pricing because I know that a lot of drivers are going to be like, hey, look, Uber's pricing is not great. And yes, I hear that and I will be addressing that. But I really want to just break down the numbers first so that you can decide whether or not Uber driving is worth it in London and the UK in 2024. I hope this video has helped, guys. Sorry if I've babbled on a little bit. Sometimes I'm just trying to remember all the information and I might have forgotten something. And if I have, drop me a comment below and I'll be happy to answer it. Do drop a like on this video as it helps me out on the algorithm, and I'll see you in another video in the future from me, Private Hire Mike. Have a great day.